Welcome to episode 1 of Northwest Shortlines, large-scale outdoor model railroading series, La Madera Branch, Fn3 Scale, by Jeff Gust. Before we explore the La Madera Branch in Fn3 Scale, we need to understand the broader picture of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad in the southern Colorado and the northern New Mexico area, and more specifically, the road south to Santa Fe. The La Madera Branch connected to a larger line owned and operated by the Denver and Rio Grande known as the Santa Fe Branch. This was the dream and ambition of Civil War veteran General William J. Palmer, who sought to connect American commerce to Mexico through a north-to-south line. In the mid-1880s, Standard Rail was laid from Denver to Pueblo, then from Pueblo on south, and then west over mountain passes to Alamosa. From Alamosa and beyond, the line was primarily narrow gauge. Antonito, which means Little Anthony in Spanish, sat just a few miles north of the New Mexico border. At Antonito, trains could head west to Chama and eventually on to Durango, Colorado. Or they could continue south to Santa Fe, New Mexico. The line from Antonito to Santa Fe was named the Santa Fe Branch and was affectionately called the Chili Line by the local train crews. By the early 20th century, the United States Forest Service had surveyed vast groves of ponderosa pine to the west, across the Rio Grande Valley from Taos, and just north of Ojo Caliente. In 1913, the regionally successful, Denver-based lumber company Halleck & Howard, won a bid for the rights to cut an advertised 117 million board feet of lumber from the Carson National Forest in northern New Mexico. In April of 1914, H&H successfully negotiated a contract with the D&RG to build a narrow-gauge line from the old station point at Caliente, up some 15 miles west into the mountains to La Madera, where the H&H mill would be located. According to the D&RGW 1940 timetable, and 331.7 miles south from Denver, the Chili Line passed through the old station point of Caliente, which was renamed in 1914 to Taos Junction as a new logging line was being built. By July of 1915, logging operations on the La Madera Branch had begun. In this photo by Walter Perry, we see an especially important piece of equipment known as the McGiffert Stiff Leg Boom Loader. This was a steam-powered crane that would hoist heavy logs onto flat cars. For several years, the logging business out of the Carson National Forest was very profitable and had a direct impact on the sustainability of the Chili Line. This is a view of the La Madera sawmill, looking west toward Canada de La Madera in 1925. H&H had multiple mills. Here we see Planing Mill 1 in the log pond. Planing Mill 1 in 1915. Rain or shine, sleet or snow, logs were harvested and hauled out of Carson National Forest year-round. However, by 1927, most of the accessible timber had been harvested. H&H could either seek further investments and funding to cross the numerous ravines and steeper elevations to the north or file to close the line. In October of 1930, and with less than $1,000 in annual revenue, the railroad filed with the ICC for a total line abandonment. The ICC made the abandonment official on June 15, 1931, and remaining assets were subsequently sold off. After a glimpse into the history of the La Madera branch as it existed, we can postulate on its rise and fall, or perhaps entertain and create an alternate reality based on what we know. Instead of abandonment, what if the decision was made to traverse north into the higher elevations and continue to harvest more timber? What if that decision was bestowed to someone else other than the Halleck and Howard Logging Company? Perhaps someone who had the experience, the resources, and the constitution to effectively expand the northern New Mexico logging empire. In this next segment, we will explore an alternate reality that skews different than abandonment in 1930. Instead, let's say that the Halleck and Howard Lumber Company sold their operation to a fictitious company called Hull and Oaks, in a reimagined version of the La Madera branch. First, let's review H&H's expanse of logging lines as they existed at the end. At Taos Junction, the old logging line to La Madera split off and headed south and then turned west. In 1934, Highway 285 was constructed and crossed this line 5 times before reaching Ojo Caliente. The line did not actually go through the town of Ojo Caliente but skirted north just outside of town. At one time, a small number 1 style depot was located here. The line reached the sawmill in La Madera by way of Canoncito de La Madera, which translates to Little Canyon of Wood. During its lifetime in Carson National Forest, the H&H logging network would see roughly 30 miles of track laid. At La Madera, access to the timber was first, by way of the Valle Grande line west, then in 1922, by way of the Vallecillos line to the north. By 1927, most of the lower elevation and easily accessible timber had been harvested and the extent of the H&H interests had been reached. Considering an alternate reality where the Hull and Oaks Lumber Company continued to expand the trackage to the north, they would have most likely continued the spider web of lines past Hondo, Felipito, and La Manga canyons, continuing to follow the Rio Vallecillos. That being the assumption, Rio Vallecillos would have led the surveyors and eventually, the track gang into a heavily forested area between Kiowa Mountain to the east, and Quartzsite Peak to the north. A new funnel camp would have been established at the base of this incline. We will call this new location Camp Borracho. Borracho to Vallecillos is roughly 9 miles of sharp curves and numerous elevation changes. With this new extension, HNO now had access to an arguably endless resource of ponderosa pine. Originally, the D&RG operated the spur from Taos Junction up to La Madera and H&H operated the logging lines beyond the mill. According to a few historical accounts, D&RG crews were not in favor of this arrangement and there were often unexpected changes in hours, duties, and equipment protocols resulting in formal complaints. In the Hull and Oaks reality, we will assume the entire operation from the logging lines to the sawmill and planing mill at La Madera would have been purchased. We will also assume that all locomotives, logging equipment, structures, and otherwise the entirety of the old operation would have also been absorbed. For operational purposes, HNO would have most likely observed the old D&RG timetable as the H&H company did previously. That said, it is safe to assume that the modest army of H&H locomotives would have continued to handle the collection of timber. H&H owned an assortment of second-hand equipment including a handful of 280s and a Climax. Most of the operational changes would have been seen in the expansion of logging lines to the north on the Vallecillos line. More than likely, equipment would have been replaced or updated as finances permitted. It is likely that HNO would have invested in 1 or 2 more robust, geared locomotives that were better suited for the longer and heavier hauls, along with the development of a more effective way to transport loggers and equipment up into the woods. Fast forward 25 years, it's November 5, 1955, and the air carries the distinct southwestern scent of pinyon smoke as the fall transitions to winter. The sounds of felling tall timber and steam-powered boom cranes loading flat cars can still be heard in the northern Carson National Forest. The Hull and Oaks Lumber Company has been busy. Now we will look at a track plan that embraces the possibilities of what the La Madera Branch might have looked like had it experienced success and produced timber past the 1930s. This plan depicts the La Madera Branch if it were the 1950s. The model railroad is in Fn3 scale, or a model compression of 1 to 20.3. It is built completely in narrow gauge with no power to the rails. All power will be on board the equipment, with DCC, sound and remote control operation. There is a 20-foot by 10-foot shed that acts as hidden staging for the two terminus points, Borracho and Taos Junction. We will start there. With new ownership on the logging line, and the newly designated local and mail service, an updated and improved timetable has been issued. Today, we will ride along with the last rail bus down the hill, number 482. In the interest of a layout tour, we will start at Borracho. Normally, the rail bus service is strictly operated on timetable between Taos Junction and La Madera. The rail bus is owned and operated by D&RGW and follows the latest D&RGW timetable and schedule. The schedule shows 2 round trips daily, Monday through Saturday with no service on Sundays. Number 482 operates as a first-class train and serves as the HNO personnel shuttle and handles local mail service between Taos Junction and La Madera. After the remaining HNO loggers have boarded, number 482 leaves Borracho. Number 482 exits the shed through a wooden tunnel portal and passes a rock cut. At this elevation, the ponderosa pine groves are thick and tucked in between dramatic exposed granite rock formations. Vallecillos is just up ahead. The afternoon rail bus is responsible for all the mail stops along the line. Typically, these stops are made on the afternoon uphill trip as number 481. As we roll by Vallecillos, we pass the water column and windmill. The Vallecillos mail stop takes place at the crossing of El Burro Riendo Road, where modern-day Highway 111 and 576 intersect. Highball and Conies. Next stop, La Madera. A scheduled stop at La Madera. The HNO platform sits on what is now the stub end of the Y. Before 1927, this end of the Y provided access to the Rio Grande line. Number 482 backs out onto the Y, over Rio Vallecillo. Once clear of the switch points, number 482 can continue down past the sawmill. After passing the sawmill at La Madera, number 482 rounds the large loop surrounding the log dump pond. Number 482 then passes the Flying Sea Ranch in Ojo Caliente. Ojo Caliente is another mail stop on the uphill run which takes place on the east side of the Highway 285 crossing near the diner. The first mail stop on the way up to La Madera is here at Solo. Number 481 typically makes the stop on the east side of the grade crossing by Contractor Supply. High ball solo. Number 482 exits the lower level behind a view block of juniper and pinyon pine, and back into the shed. Number 482 has arrived at its final destination of Taos Junction, and this concludes today's trip and the tour of the track plan. The entire length of the railroad is 116 feet. The loop around the log dump pond is roughly 16 foot in diameter and facilitates a 2.6% grade between the upper and lower level. The upper level stands at 53 inches in height and represents H&O's logging line supporting the use of geared locomotives and log bunks. The lower level stands at 40 inches in height and represents the spur from La Madera to Taos Junction, which is timetable operated by the D&RGW. In theory, logs are brought down from Borracho, using a 55-ton, 3-truck shay from Bachman. At La Madera, the locomotive uses the siding to run around a 7 to 10 car train. Then, pulling the train back up the grade and out beyond the planing mill in order to clear the switch points to the log dump track. Finally, the shay shoves the loaded log bunks into the log dump track, empties the log cars, then repositions the caboose to the rear to head back up to Borracho. In addition, there is a daily D&RGW local that comes up from Taos Junction. The local is second class and services the local shippers at Solo and Ojo Caliente, as well as any shipping and receiving needs up at the finished lumber mill at La Madera. Besides the occasional water or fire train, or track maintenance equipment, the final operational component is the D&RGW rail bus that makes 2 trips a day from Taos Junction to La Madera. It carries H&O personnel and mail and runs as first class. This layout is capable of handling up to 4 operators. Construction on the La Madera branch in Fn3 Scale begins summer of 2022. If you would like to see more on this layout, hit the like button, subscribe and stay tuned for more video releases on the progress. Thanks for watching.